You're listening to All Things Video, the podcast dedicated to uncovering the past and charting the future of the online video ecosystem. You're listening to All Things Video. I'm your host, James Creech, and today's guest is Austin Petersmith, founder and CEO of Racket. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited we get to spend some time together today and chat a little bit. I thought we'd, rewind time and start off by talking a little bit about your background. So how did you initially get your start in media and technology?
So the very first job I had in media was an internship at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And I was there in the fall semester 2008 when I was in college. And I had such an amazing time there and was like so inspired seeing the way that they were reporting the news and creating comedy and doing it in a way that like blended those two together so well. And it inspired me to become a journalist. And so then I ended up going to Northwestern for grad school to study journalism. And that was kind of like how I ended up in media, becoming a reporter. And then I was interested in technology forever. And ultimately, I think the thing that pushed me to move kind of away from being a journalist and toward technology, there were a number of reasons, and I was drawn to it kind of naturally, but one was just the fact that I took out monster student loans to study journalism. And then I learned that working as a journalist was going to make it nearly impossible to ever pay those loans off. And so that was a big part of it. But then also I really, really was drawn from a young age to technology. And so I was excited to go kind of make that shift.
Yeah. And in many respects, technology has fundamentally changed journalism and the economic imperatives that drive the journalism business, right? So the two are closely linked.
Totally.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Daily Show internship, first of all, because that seems like a dream gig for someone in college to land. How did that come about?
So I just sort of sent an application in. I think they get a lot of these applications. I had a friend of my brother's worked for Stephen Colbert's show, and so I think that I sort of got like maybe like they put in a good word or something. I don't really know. I imagine they get tons of these, but I tried to write the most absurd kind of cover letter with my resume that I could, and so I like to think that that's what caught their attention. And then they did interviews. They offered to do a phone interview, but my brother was living in New York, so I went out and interviewed in person, and then they offered it to me. So it was a group, I think that it was like 12 of us, and they always, each semester they would have like a new group of 12 interns. So it was a very kind of established program, and it was really cool. You rotate through all these different departments and roles, so you get to see the writing room and you get to see the work that like production assistants do. A lot of what the interns ended up doing like would be running around New York to get like footage that they need from like some random video rental store, is how it was done back then, or like a random prop that they needed. I remember one time like going to 10 toy stores in the same day because I needed to find one of those like wooden paddles with the rubber red ball on the elastic string that they needed for like something to show how the economy was crashing, or I can't remember what it was, but some reason that they needed that prop. And so it was like, go find this in Manhattan. And and so it was a huge range of different things, but such a cool experience, because I just felt like I was seeing people in their prime doing just unbelievable work that they were also proud of. And it was during an election, and so it was like such a time that there was so much attention on the show. And it just like inspired me. And then also was so cool to just see how normal it's like. You see it on TV and it feels like there's like so much to it, and that it's like just this major, like, I mean, it is a major production, but it's also just everyday people who are creating this thing that's like so amazing every single day. And so you get to see how like there's a level of normalcy almost to doing work that is so impactful like that.
Just another day at the office.
Yeah.
Very cool. No, it sounds like such a inspiring experience. And then it sparked your interest in journalism. So you go to grad school and you become a journalist. What were you covering? What were you writing about at the time?
So the Northwestern program has you go to Washington, D.C. for like the last bit of the program. And so while I was there, I was reporting on politics and things. I was just doing like kind of freelance stuff, and then continued that. So I had never ended up with a full-time job as a journalist. But I was doing a number of different freelance reporting gigs for mostly covering Capitol Hill and things like that. And then around then is when I found my way to Silicon Valley.
Nice. So in 2014, you founded Read This Thing, which was a curation-focused email newsletter, which was later acquired by Inside.com. What inspired you to launch that as your first venture?
Yeah, so at that point, I was kind of my day job. I was working at a startup doing sort of developer evangelism and community management, and I really, really liked it. And but I missed working with the news, and so it kind of started. I would often just send interesting articles to friends, and I was like, oh, maybe I could just like make this a newsletter that other people could subscribe to. And so I just started like then, and the idea that I came up with is I'm going to send it Monday through Friday, once a day, Monday through Friday, and link to a single article every time. So the idea is like, I'm just going to send you something that I think is really fantastic. And so Read This Thing, the name's pretty literal and made sense. And so I set up the .com and created a MailChimp list or whatever and let people sign up. And then it kind of just like spread. It never became massive, but I think by the time that it got rolled into Inside, I think it was like 20,000 subscribers or something. And so it was like in 2 years, it grew to that. And
which is big, right? In the days before Substack and everything else. Like that's impressive. Yep.
Yeah. And so it was like, in terms of content that I was creating, it was really lightweight because it would be like, I write 2 sentences about why I love this article and then I share it, but I was sharing a lot of like really long form stuff, but then it was just anything interesting. Sometimes I would link to like creative visual storytelling or like data journalism or some piece of journalism that just like had an impact on me for some reason. And then other times it was like, just a lot of like long form, just really fantastic writing. And and it was just a really fun kind of way to get experience just building something on the internet and putting it out there and seeing how people respond to it.
Very cool. So had you always considered yourself an entrepreneur, or what tugged at you to launch that business?
I definitely like always, I guess I probably always thought of myself as an entrepreneur to some extent. And I did have businesses in high school. I had like a pressure washing business that with a friend called Blastmasters that actually like did pretty well for a couple of summers. We had an amazing growth hack, which was that we would, if you could convince your parents to hire us, then we would buy you a case of beer. And so we just like spread that around, and people would, that covered all of our lead gen, and people were getting their parents to hire us to wash their decks. And I don't know. So I think I always like, I don't think I ever thought of it in a really narrow way as like my career will be building companies. But I think I always definitely thought of entrepreneurship as something that would be a part of my life. And then with Read This Thing, I think it was like, I felt not ready to go like start a startup and raise money and do all of those things. But I also felt like just this draw to create something. And it turned out to be a really good experience for that because it helped me kind of like learn about like, the actual technical side of like, I had been kind of learning software development. I didn't build much software for Read This Thing, but it was like, actually putting something out in production is a totally different experience than doing, whatever else Code Academy type of thing. And so that was a pretty amazing part of it. And then, just like seeing how people respond and like getting angry emails from people that are like, I tried to unsubscribe and I'm still getting your emails. And like all of those experiences just were like so cool for me. And so I was just having so much fun with it. Never really even tried to monetize it. It just was like a fun kind of thing and helped me, I think, kind of find my legs as an entrepreneur, I guess.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's evoking a lot of memories of me starting this podcast back in 2015, which was pre, Anchor, like out of the box tools to launch your own podcast. So I was like, how do I record audio and how do I edit this thing and how do I, get it up on some sort of RSS feed so people can listen to it? And it was like, going through that process of figuring out how to start something, a creative enterprise from nothing, was challenging, but also rewarding. And this was before I launched my first business, Paladin. And it kind of builds that muscle of doing something new, right? Which I think like as adults, we're more and more reticent to do stuff like that, right? To take on a new hobby or learn new things because we're older and set in our ways and we kind of feel like we know the things that we like. And also it can be harder as we get older to be a beginner again, right? To like force yourself to try something new and be bad at something for a while, right? A lot of us as adults want to feel comfortable in the things that we know and like and are good at. But I think it's so important to have that beginner's mindset and to work that muscle and develop that skill over time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Super cool. So after you spend some time at inside.com, ultimately actually leading that entire group. So I'm curious how you went from an acquisition to overseeing the entire enterprise.
Yeah, so it sort of happened all at once. So I had this newsletter and I was a part of a startup that was winding down, and so I was trying to figure out what to do next. And Inside, Jason Calacanis had started it years earlier, and they had been most recently doing this news. They had like a news curation mobile app, but they had kind of made this decision to focus entirely on newsletters. And Jason was looking for someone to kind of run it, and so we got introduced through a friend of mine, and then started kind of chatting, and so then it made sense. And then I had this newsletter, and it was like, well, that we might as well kind of like roll that in, because the idea was like, let's build this network of newsletters. And so I joined, and we started with one newsletter, and then my newsletter, Read This Thing, rolled into it, and then we started kind of expanding from there. And and today that business is, I'm not involved anymore, but the business is still doing pretty well and has a whole bunch of newsletters that are thriving.
That's awesome. Good to hear. And after Inside.com, you founded Capiche, which describes itself as a secret society for power users of SaaS products, which I love. Tell us more about that experience.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, as we've talked about, journalism has been always kind of a draw for me, and a big part of that is the kind of the way that journalism can kind of like uncover truth, and also like remove information asymmetry or solve information asymmetry. And then also a lot of my time working in Silicon Valley has been building communities and building user-generated content platforms and things like that. And so those two things were kind of the foundational, like what gets me really excited, and is like building community and like helping people put their voice out online, and then like the kind of information asymmetry thing. And then there was a much more like acute frustration that I had, which is that buying SaaS software when I was running a business, I came across this constantly with all these different things. A number of them, like, well, one is there's these review sites, G2 Crowd, Capterra, a couple of others. They all have a purely pay-to-play model. You can find some interesting information on there, but you can't really, the star ratings and those things are all pretty much for sale. And so you are just looking at who paid them the most money when you see who has the best rating. And
then they have huge SEO value, right? So those review sites like
totally
always rank at the top when you're doing research for these types of SaaS products. Yep.
Right. And they get backlinks from the vendors so that's how they do so well on SEO. And so was really frustrating. And then like, just to learn about pricing, you often have to do like a demo call with a salesperson. And so there's not a lot of transparency in pricing. And then I also got to see, like, in some of the circles that I was in with friends who are founders and things like that, there are a lot of secret ways to spend less money on software than what you're going to pay otherwise. And there's a lot of value in having access to that information. And so basically I wanted to kind of solve this and ultimately like kind of compete with Gartner and with these review sites, and build something much more kind of grassroots that's like a community of people sharing the things that are actually useful about like what product is the best one to solve this particular problem, or like how much are you actually paying for this? How much did they try to get you to pay? How did you negotiate it? And like what features actually exist? Are there features that salespeople are saying are on the roadmap, but that they've been saying it's on the roadmap for 3 years? Like all these different things that as a person who has to buy software for your business, it's really, really hard when you don't have any insight into it. And so we kind of built this community around those ideas of like you can ask questions about software. You can do this kind of Glassdoor thing where you just like share how much you're paying anonymously, and then the community can kind of vet those and respond to them. And so the idea was really to like build this sort of almost IMDb type of like just a database of everything you'd want to know about a software product. And yeah, and so spent about 2 years on it, and we raised a little bit of money, and we built a decent amount of traction, like a lot of traffic. And then the community was kind of growing, but in order to get to the scale that those kind of competitors are at, the trajectory had to be a lot bigger than it was. And so eventually kind of it became clear to me like we could monetize this. It could be this kind of like niche community, and there's something cool there, but it's like the actual road to doing what I wanted to do, which was like fundamentally changing the way that this works so that the vendors actually just like give up their efforts to keep the pricing secret, and so that like anyone can kind of come across this information. It was not clear that we were going to get to that level of like escape velocity. And so basically then we kind of like, as a team, we kept kind of working on Capiche, and also we're experimenting with some other products. And ultimately then I met Ryan. Ryan knew the CEO of a company called Vendor, that has since gone on to raise a ton of money, and they're really awesome. So they started at a similar time to us, and they were in a similar space to Capiche, but from a totally different angle. So they buy and manage all of your software on your behalf, and
that's interesting.
they do the negotiation and everything. So it's much more of like a service, but they're building technology to optimize all of it, and they serve big companies primarily, and the kind of
that's smart. So they can make sure everything talks to each other, and they can make sure it gets implemented correctly, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And they can share that, they can like, yeah, build technology to know like what actually should you be paying, and to do some like data understanding of the, like the different products that are on the market and all those different things, to just help companies be smarter about the way that they're buying software and the software that they're buying. And yeah, and so they had started at a similar time to us. And before Ryan and I met, I had heard from a few different companies reaching out, trying to like with interest to buy Capiche. And I had like kind of pushed those away, because ultimately the main like targets for selling what we were building were going to be the companies we set out to kind of disrupt. And I just didn't want to do that. It just wasn't interesting, because then it would suddenly, this thing that we put so much love into building, this community would like have ads all over it and be and lose its kind of purity. But Vendor is really cool because they are aligned with what we were setting out to do, in terms of like, we stand on the side of the buyer, not the vendor. And then they also kind of had an interesting reason for wanting to own Capiche, which is that they want to let it kind of thrive as a community, and they don't want it to be like an aggressive lead gen thing for them. You can see now some of the branding, you can see on the site that it's owned by Vendor, but they think about it in a much more big picture kind of thing of like, if we create goodwill by putting this out in the world, and like creating that kind of transparency, then as companies grow bigger, like smaller companies, Vendor's product isn't super relevant to them, and they might need more. And so it's like a really good kind of like, I guess, alignment there. And then I really liked Ryan, and so we got to talking, and he made an offer, and so we sold that business, and we're able to kind of like transition it over to them, but keep our entire team together to go on and start a new company. And that was another thing that I kind of was really interested in, because I loved the team I was working with, and didn't want to kind of like do an acqui-hire where we go join some big company. So so that was kind of that's amazing process. Yeah, and Ryan invested in our new company, and so yeah, it's like it just was a really fun process, and and was super cool to get to know them, because I really love what they're doing.
Amazing. Gosh, there's so much here that I want to unpack. So we'll take it piece by piece. The first thing before we move off of Capiche and Vendor, and obviously everyone should check it out, because it sounds like it's continuing to grow as this thriving community. But if you had to summarize some of the learnings that you came across in 2+ years running that business, what are your general tips or takeaways for people who are trying to go out and buy SaaS products?
Well, I have a whole Twitter thread about it that was like one it was like a thread of fun facts. I think this is the most viral thread I've ever had, and fun facts about SaaS pricing. So I'm trying to remember like some of the really like juicy ones, but I think mainly, I mean, I would say what I said about the review sites, don't read a whole lot into those. And where you find the nuggets of truth are from either direct contact, like friends that you can talk to, or founder Slack groups that you're in, or things like that. And then also like forums. So like oftentimes before Capiche, I mean, and then Capiche is still a really good resource, but yeah, it's like you have to find the humans out there, because if you're just searching Google, you're going to find the things that were optimized to show up in Google, and so like Reddit is such a good source, and you have to get good at like sifting through because anyone can post anything on Reddit, but that's where you're going to find humans that are actually talking about their real experience, and so that's definitely one thing that I think is pretty key. And then I think the other thing is just like every single sales contract that every single software product that you buy is negotiable. And so you should negotiate. Sometimes it's not worth your time. And so you should just like pay the self-service price or whatever. But if you are worried about it, then you can always push back, because you can't always get exactly what price you want, but there are very, very few companies that, even if they say that they never negotiated on pricing, like there are very few that actually really, really hold to that. And so yeah, always push, I think.
For sure. Awesome. And, you had mentioned the pressure washing business in high school. And then of course you launched the newsletter business, but it sounds like this was your first time kind of building a company and hiring employees and raising money. So what was the hardest part of being a first-time founder?
I mean, everything is so hard about it. And so hard in ways that the like side projects or like the pressure washing business, it just doesn't even like compare. I think it's one thing that's like kind of surprising, I guess, as I'm now farther into it and have gone through raising more money. It's like you can feel like, oh, if I could just like raise, I mean, at the start of Capiche, it probably to me felt like if I could raise $750,000, like that would be so much money and I would just be like set. I wouldn't be stressed. But it's like none of the things that you think will remove the stress will actually do it. And so it's just hard. And I think the one area that for me has always been really challenging is that we often project these things as like being kind of binary of like, okay, like if this we'll build this business, and if it works, then great. And if it doesn't work, then okay, we move on. But the most common thing is you end up in a weird middle space where you don't know if it's working or not. And you have to make hard decisions about, do we keep going in this direction? We know it's not working insanely well, but we also don't think it's failing. And so those are some of the hardest kind of decisions. And it can be on the smallest thing of like one experiment that you run where you're hopefully you're going to get a binary yes or no, but really what you'll most likely get is something that's in between where you have to kind of like make the call of like, yeah, and so that's really one thing that has been tricky for me, especially like when we were going through this kind of question with Capiche of like, do we keep building this? Do we try to sell it? Do we shut it down and build something else? And all of those kind of questions. And so, yeah, and I think it's, once you have a team around you, then there is just this level of like, of responsibility that just, it can be so fun, but it also is just really, really challenging because you are, need to make these decisions. There's no playbook. And I think that's one thing I thought before is like, I had been investing in startups and I'd been around a lot of startups and seen, and then I'd been like in like a senior role in a startup and like managing teams and stuff. And so I thought that I like kind of understood the path. And the main thing that I learned is like, there just isn't a path. And
there's no substitute for doing it yourself. As much as those other experiences are great and they'll round out your knowledge, you have to kind of go through it.
Yeah,
for sure. And the other thing that resonated with me is the fact that you're on this mission at Capiche to kind of introduce more transparency, right? And you have this ambition to kind of change the way that things are done. And now there's kind of this culture more around like building startups in public, meaning some people are sharing their metrics very publicly, maybe even pricing, displaying every deal, every customer they win, salaries in some businesses, they're showing everybody what everybody makes. And in some respects, there's some really exciting and awesome elements about that. what's your take on this level of radical transparency that's coming to startups?
So, well, the salary transparency thing I think is wild, and I do know a handful of companies that are doing that, and then also ones that are sharing their like sales metrics and things on a public dashboard. And I mean, I think that's super cool. I don't see that being like a trend that every company does, and I think but I admire it because it's a bold kind of decision to do and to make, and it's also like a I don't know. I mean, I'm curious how employees of those companies feel because it's sort of their salary is out there as well. And so I don't know. Yeah, that one I haven't like spent that's pretty different from the types of things that we were focused on. And then but I think it's really interesting. And then the kind of build in public thing, I think a lot of the kind of build in public movement is like a little bit of marketing around everything. It's like by sharing stuff, you can build a kind of community around you, which is really cool.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think that when it comes to the companies that are like at some amount of scale selling, like especially enterprise software or any sort of B2B software, I think that you might have people like the founders tweeting all the time and talking about all these different aspects of the business, but it's pretty rare for pricing to end up being totally transparent. There are definitely like a lot of the more self-service, newer SaaS products, there is more transparency, but even then there's like discount codes or bulk discounts that are kind of untalked about. And then another piece of it is just like the kind of the way that you use these tools. So if you look at, if you were to just like stand over the shoulder of someone who is a like just super power user of Microsoft Excel or Salesforce or I mean, pretty much any software tool that you could imagine, Gmail even, like if you see a person who really knows how to use Gmail, it's mind blowing to see like how different the workflow is from what the rest of us do. And I think that applies to pretty much any tool. And so I think a lot of what we were trying to work on was like getting that type of thing out there and like helping people operate more like those power users. And I think that just goes much deeper than just the types of like dashboards or things that people are sharing in like build in public.
Yeah, for sure. And look, not every business is probably set up to do that. And especially if you're B2B enterprise deals, I doubt your customers would want you to share that information. They probably have you under very strict NDA. So it's not a fit for everyone, but it is kind of an interesting movement. And I do wonder sometimes, yes, is this just all to fuel the marketing hype machine? Or is this a radical way to kind of ensure accountability and help kind of guide your business by objective metrics? So be interesting to see how that continues to progress. The other fascinating thing about your story so far that I want to touch on is you pulled off this incredible feat of landing an acquisition, but keeping your entire team, which I imagine has to be a very difficult needle to thread, right? So how'd you pull that off?
Yeah. So like I said, we had already been kind of like experimenting with some different products. We had investors who were super supportive of us. And then we also just didn't, because of all of those things, we didn't necessarily need to sell. And so that was almost the starting point of the conversation, was like, look, we don't need to sell this. We're open to talking about it, especially if it's the right person that's buying it. And but the kind of, I guess from the start, it was sort of like, these are stipulations, which are just that, like, not that I'm like forcing the team to stay together, but that like, I don't want to, if there was an offer that kind of stipulated some part of the team or all of the team going to a new company, then every single person on the team would have veto power on that. And I communicated that pretty clearly up front. So like, I wasn't going to just like go to the team and be like, hey, we sold it, we all work at this company now. Because again, we were experimenting on new things and really excited about where we could go. And so, yeah, so that was kind of just a upfront requirement for going down that path.
Which is great, right? To lay out your expectations up front. And then every deal is unique, right? So you found a buyer that was interested in the product that you had built and saw a way to continue to grow that community, but have a nice tie into their core business. And it sounds like it worked out for everybody. So that's great.
Yeah, definitely. And And Matt, who was running community at Creech, ended up, I think did about 6 months of transition with them. So he onboarded the community people on their side and did like just a ton of work to kind of like pass the torch, and I think still has been like a resource for them. And so so we were supportive in every way that we could. We just kept our team together. Yeah. And then
very cool. So let's hear about Racket right now, what you're building with the same team. And it's an app for sharing short audio snippets. So why the audio space, and what was the original inspiration behind Racket?
Yeah, so like I said, kind of community and user-generated content have been my focuses for a long time. And I definitely became really bored of the enterprise software space after 2 years in that. And so I was excited to go work on something really different. And an observation that I had was that when you look at the ways people are creating content on the internet, there are over 100 million people in the world blogging today. There are over 100 million people in the world posting content on TikTok today. And there are less than 1 million people making podcasts. And that's insane to me. That delta makes no sense, because podcasting is like built on open source technology. It's supposed to be just this like publishing for the masses. And I think what it ended up being is a sort of like almost a recreation of the gatekeepers that existed in like radio beforehand. Because if you look at the top 100 podcasts, almost all of them are either hosted by a celebrity or backed by a major company. And so it's not this kind of like thing that random people are just breaking through, like TikTok, where you see that every single day, a new like teenager who suddenly is a celebrity. And it's based on the content that they actually produced. And I think podcasting, it's like, if you can't, so there's a number of different things with podcasting. Getting started is complicated. There's some technical things with figuring out how RSS works and creating a website for your podcast and going through all the different like directories and all those things. It's like, if you just look at a list of like how to start a podcast, it's like 100 steps long, and it takes a lot of time. And then the actual like production of your podcast requires, like, the most successful podcasts have a cadence that they publish on. And so you have to kind of be able to like stick to that and follow through. And editing audio is like insanely hard. It's harder than editing video, because you're just looking at waveforms instead of like having visual cues that you can actually like scrub through and find the thing you're looking for. And so editing audio is super hard and definitely like a big lift. And then after you actually like get through all of that, then you launch, and 90% of podcasts are dead within 90 days. And the reason for that is that you start with no audience, no content gets distributed. The only way the content gets distributed is through a person subscribing to all of your episodes. So no episode can just like spread and like be like the way that one tweet can just go viral, and then you're back to your same small audience the next day with your next tweet. And so it's all at the show level. And so that means that we all are kind of like relegated to the 8 shows that we subscribe to, essentially. And then we add maybe a couple here and there throughout the year and remove some here and there. But it's like, it's not that you're constantly hearing different voices. And so to become one of those 8 slots for a person is pretty difficult, especially if you're brand new. And so it's a long lift. And I mean, you went through it, so I would love to hear kind of your experience.
Still going through it. I mean,
yeah.
Everything you said perfectly resonates. Look, I was in a role at the time where I found myself talking to really interesting people. And I just said, gosh, I wish I could sit down with some of these people and ask them a lot of questions that I'm intellectually curious about. And I wish that I could share this with more people, because I think it's so fascinating. And so started it just as a creative passion project, have never made money from this thing. In fact, I lose money on it every year, but it's not about that, right? For me, it's like, I enjoy having the conversations. It's been an amazing learning and experience for me, a networking experience, that I'm so happy to do it. But absolutely, it's very challenging. And still 6-7 years later, like, my audience is small, but it's a community of people that I know and who I'm very fortunate to hear from them. They're like, hey, I love this episode, or I get a lot of value out of it. And that's why I do it, right? It's like, it's really cool to build that community and share with people.
Yep, totally. And yeah, so I think like that your use case is really awesome. But I think it just that is limiting the people who like have the tenacity and the time and the resources to do it when there's not necessarily like, when it might not be like a source of income. And then and then you do really need to just like keep going forever. Like I have friends who make 7 figures a year on their podcast, and it's like amazing, and they're so thrilled to be there, but it's also just a like almost kind of handcuffs, because it's like, you know, if you stop for 6 months,
it
like
goes away.
It's just gone. Yeah. You and so you have to keep going, and so I think that those things just are all reasons that it is like this limited number of voices that are out there in this medium, and voice and verbal communication is like the most native kind of medium that we have as humans. And so I just can't be convinced that like these are all the people who have something interesting to say out on the internet. And so what we've been thinking about for about a year now is like, how do you solve that? How do you crack open the top of the funnel and get lots and lots more voices online? And we were building a few different things. Initially, we built like a podcasting tool that was super easy. So it was on Twilio, and you would get like a phone number, and you just call that phone number. And as soon as you hear a beep, then you're actually like live streaming and recording. And
wow.
And then as soon as you hang up the phone, then we publish the MP3 and syndicate it out via RSS. So you've like published a podcast episode as soon as you hang up. And that through doing that, we had a bunch of people using it, and a couple of iterations of products like that. But and so we made it like unbelievably easy to make a podcast and actually get it published. Through iTunes, you have to go through the approval process, but on the other directories, like that's all you have to do. If you just get it out there, then it's there and it's published. And but what we realize is that it's like, it comes down to everything that happens after that, which is that like, to build an audience, you need to keep just grinding, and you need to keep the cadence up, and it has to be this long process. And increasingly, it's only possible to do it if you have a big audience to bring to the table. And so then we kind of started thinking about, okay, like how, if just making it easy to publish a podcast isn't the answer, maybe the problem is actually that podcasting, the way that the podcasts are distributed, is fundamentally not going to let this get better. And so maybe we need to just create a way, in the same way that like Twitter, like blogging was this really popular thing, but it was kind of a specific thing. It was like, you kind of, typically bloggers would have some sort of publishing cadence. A blog post would typically not be shorter than like maybe 300 words or something, and typically includes like a photo and a headline, and like and there's some expectation of a little bit of like editing and polish. And obviously lots of people who broke those kind of norms, but those norms still existed. And I think podcasting has similar norms of around audio quality and editing and cadence and all those different things, episode length. And then something like Twitter comes along, and it's like, it is blogging, but they didn't call it that. And it lowered the stakes. It lowered the friction and the stakes. So it was like, don't think about like, what am I going to publish on my blog today? And think about it in this like really grandiose way. Just like write words in this box and press send. And what happened as a result of that is that like all these people who wouldn't have gone and bought a domain and set up a WordPress site and like become a blogger
can now microblog from their phone whenever they want.
Yeah, and they were just spewing words out, and like both Twitter and Tumblr, I think, accomplished that in like making it so easy for people to just say something, and you get then a long tail kind of distribution of like a lot of stuff that is like either just like boring or not, or like bad or offensive or whatever else, but you also get this magical thing, which is that people are just going through the experience of publishing online, and they're doing it like 50 times a day instead of like twice a week. And it's like just that velocity. Then all these people who were like early Twitter, Tumblr users are now like published best-selling authors, and became like, found their voice as writers by the fact that the friction was removed. And I think that podcasting is in a similar space right now. And so what we're trying to do, basically, ultimately, after we built a few different audio products and learned from a lot of people that are like, what I would say podcast curious, where they're like, my friends think I should start a podcast, but like, am I really going to do all of this stuff? And what will that look like? And so we've tried to make it insanely easy. So Racket, it's an iOS app right now. It'll be on Android eventually, but you can just like press a button and record. We have some lightweight editing that you can do, but we kind of almost like downplay it. So it's like a lot of people are just pressing record, talking. The posts are capped at 99 seconds, which makes it like more approachable, because you don't feel like you need to make a whole 45-minute really compelling thing. And what's been so cool about it is like all these people, there are podcasters using it, but then there are all these people who have never published their voice online who are having a blast with it, like talking about their life. There are comedians who are like just testing out material, and all these different things that you don't see in podcasting, and that just kind of are just the early spark. So we launched in the App Store less than about like 6 weeks ago, I guess. So it's really, really kind of just getting started, but you can see the spark of like creativity and the ways that people are building off of each other's ideas, and like taking this kind of medium to another level. And so, and that kind of is what has always been, from when we started working on audio, it was that kind of, why aren't there 100 million people publishing their voice online if there are 100 million people publishing words online? And like,
and arguably voice could be even easier. It's just there are still these barriers to audio.
Yeah. And like, what would it look like to solve that? And what would the impact be? Because I do fundamentally believe that audio is better for kind of creating human connection and sparking empathy. And I think there is also data that supports this. And I think part of it is that it's like, it's a less passive experience. So watching a movie, you kind of sit back and just absorb it basically. And listening to This American Life or something like that, it's like, you don't get the benefit of just sitting back to absorb it, because you have to listen and then build a world in your head as you're doing it. So it's a much more active kind of experience. And I think what's exciting to me is like, if you could get a social network around audio to scale, then you would be taking a lot of this time that all of us spend kind of like consuming social media and turning it to a slightly more active, more engaged experience, and one that I think can be more conducive to like human kind of connection. And a lot of the stuff we see on Racket is like, especially given how early it is, like people talking about really, really personal stuff, and being willing to do that sometimes under like a pseudonym or something. But I think audio with the camera turned off lets people do that type of thing. And so that's Racket.
I love it. Yeah, as I was preparing to talk with you today, I was thinking through what are the use cases of Racket, and some of the notes I put were, well, are you attacking microblogging for audio a la Twitter? Are you trying to build the audio equivalent of TikTok and have algorithmic kind of entertainment or educational content? Is it audio messaging a la what Snapchat did or what WhatsApp is, but with more of an audio first interface? Or is this really a tool for podcast discovery? And it seems like maybe the answer is a little bit of everything.
Yeah, there are podcasters who are posting clips from their podcasts on Racket. So there's that, like podcast discovery. That's not like a huge part of it, but we do definitely, like, I definitely think podcasting is broken, but I don't have any qualms with podcasters, and I want to support them. And we are working to support them in various ways. And so we want Racket to work for podcasters, but we don't want to build it for podcasters, because my belief is that a lot of the best stuff in podcasting is either in the long tail of podcasts that very few people will ever hear, or it's even farther up the funnel in someone's head where it's never even going to actually like get recorded and get published. And so that's the stuff that I'm like most excited about, is like, if we can get to that kind of scale where like you don't have to commit to 6 years of twice a week episodes in order to put your voice online, and you can just like have one funny thought and go put it out there, then the overall kind of body of stuff that, and whether it's like wisdom or lessons or inspiring stories or humor or anything else, like the overall body will just be so much bigger. And so there will be so much stuff that otherwise just would have never made it past the dinner table at some family dinner, but instead will be there for like later generations, or will just be there for someone halfway across the world to hear and to resonate with.
Very cool. And obviously the social audio space has been white hot at end of 2020, early 2021. Arguably maybe it's cooled off a bit, or there's some skepticism now around, what Clubhouse flew really high and then maybe has started to stagnate. What is your take on audio? Is it a fad, or is this the next big exciting movement and battleground?
I mean, audio just like, I think if you looked at the overall data of people consuming audio, and you compared it to the like data of people talking about the consumption of audio, or like social audio or whatever else, like you would see this like massive spike of social audio being this thing, and then like kind of a drop off where it's like cooled off. But the curve of people listening to audio, you might see a blip basically, because it's like because if like in terms of radio, that's still a massive medium that has like held on in a way that television and newspapers and lots of other kind of legacy media hasn't. And so there's a lot of that is audio consumption that's still happening like at a crazy scale. And then in terms of and then podcasting has just never stopped growing. Like podcasting, I think maybe, I don't know about 2021. I know 2020 was like blowout record year for podcasting, and I assume that kind of continued. And so I think audio, I don't think that the kind of like hype cycles do a good job of actually weaving through the fact that like audio has always been here and will always be here. And then in terms of the actual like hype cycle, I think that's I don't know. Yeah. I mean, it's how it impacts us is like, well, I don't know. I guess I would say, I think Clubhouse is really, really awesome. I'm not a huge user of it, but I think it's like again, like these are the things that inspire me, are ways that get people to put their voice out there. The live aspect for me is, like I said, we were playing around with some live products. And so it's, yeah, I mean, I think that Clubhouse is awesome. And I think that it generally with any of these things, when like the hype is in the favor of a trend or a particular company, and it seems like they're completely taking over the world, it probably is not quite as rosy as the hype makes it seem. And then when the hype cools off and everyone is saying that this is over and it's dead, it's usually not as bad as that. And so
the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
exactly. But now you've got so much competition, not for Racket specifically, but in the audio space or social audio in particular, right? Spotify Green Room, LinkedIn's got the audio events beta out now. Facebook's been building a number of products. Discord, Reddit, like Fireside launched. You've got all these, people rushing into the space, much as we saw with short form video, right? TikTok takes off, and all of a sudden, Snapchat rolls out Spotlight, YouTube launches Shorts, Instagram has Reels. Do we just live in a copycat age where it's like, okay, we got to build this because that's the next big thing? Or is audio going to be an important component of the way that all future social platforms offer it as kind of a table stakes feature, and we should expect to communicate with each other that way?
Yeah, let's see. I feel like a few questions in there. So I think in terms of audio specifically, like, I think there will be ways that all these big platforms use it. And there probably will be ways that they rip off smaller companies. And I mean, like Twitter, of all the companies that tried like a live audio kind of Clubhouse feature, I think Twitter is the best suited. But I also just don't think like big tech companies will always do this. For me, it doesn't necessarily, like, some people like think that, I don't know, that really like trash the companies. They're like, all they're doing is ripping people off. But I think that like, it's kind of what the internet is. It's like nothing is original. It's like the news feed and the like button and the ability to reply to a comment or an @ mention or a hashtag. Like all these things are just things that have built off of each other. And so is it like sad when there's a small company that's being like completely steamrolled by a company with way deeper pockets? Like it can be, but I also don't think that there aren't too many examples that I know of where it actually led to a zero-sum outcome where so like Instagram stories was insanely successful by ripping off a feature of Snapchat, but Snapchat is continuing to thrive years later. And so would Snapchat have been more successful? Maybe, but competition is competition. And so I think overall, like what never ceases to surprise me is just that the internet is bigger than anybody thinks. And so you might think if Instagram stories is successful, then how can Snapchat possibly live? But then we can see it years later that actually like Snapchat has a pretty amazing business. They still have definitely challenges. And I don't pay a lot of attention to maybe their stock is in the gutter right now. I have no idea, but generally like they didn't die. And that was the narrative, was if Instagram stories works, it's going to kill Snapchat. And I think it just often isn't the case. And so I, like, for how we think about it, I don't think definitely not something that big companies do, and probably not something that other startups in the space do, is going to impact whether or not we are successful, because the internet is a big place.
For sure. So I want to switch gears a little bit as we start to wrap up here and talk about the fact that you and your brother Stu, who's also a friend of the podcast and has been on the show before, you two have been investing out of a fund called Cough Drop Capital for the past 7 years in early stage companies, largely kind of in and around our space, right? Media and technology. How did you get into startup investing?
Yeah, we wanted to do it for a while, and we knew that like if we wanted to invest in all the companies that we were seeing people start that we thought were awesome, then we were going to have to figure out a way to invest other people's money instead of our own. And so we kind of decided to scrape together whatever money we can and try to do like one deal a year and be very, very choosy about them so that we could try to build some track records so that we could invest other people's money. And so that's kind of what we did. So the first company we invested in was a company called Lattice and it was Stu's former boss at Teespring. Jack was starting the company. And so they didn't have a name yet. They had roughly some ideas about what they were setting out to build, but not a ton. But we had huge confidence in Jack and so we invested. They then went to Y Combinator after that, and now are like a $1 billion company that's been growing super fast and in the HR space. And so that was like a super fortunate, definitely like first investment to make. But we did make a few over a few years. And with the goal of kind of like being able to invest other people's money. And so then eventually we raised a fund that's like $1 million. And then we are getting ready this year to raise our second fund. And so it kind of, the reason that we wanted to do it was that we both were so interested in startups, and either building a startup or joining a startup, you end up like in this laser focus. You only get to like, you're like totally just in that one world. And the idea of having a bird's eye view into lots of startups just seemed so cool, and has been so cool now that we have like 30 some investments. And then also just the ability to see, like another one of our investments is a bank called Mercury, and Capiche, my first company, we were the third customer of Mercury. So I've always been like an early adopter anyway. So I like heard about them, had been frustrated with Silicon Valley Bank previously. And although I don't want to trash them because I do really like them, but I like them on a personal front. And but I had been frustrated with them as a business bank. And I heard about Mercury from a Hacker News comment. So again, like going to the forums and things. And Imad said, like, I'm building something to try to build better software for banks. And I was like, that seems super cool. I emailed him and he was like, yeah, we're still like in very private beta. You'd be the third customer. Things are not really like fully fleshed out, but yeah, you can sign on. So we did. And so I was like the third customer and I loved it immediately. And I could see the velocity and I could see the way I would like send Imad a bug report on at 6 p.m. on a Saturday, and 15 minutes later he'd be like, hey, I just pushed a fix to production. And it's like, when you see someone with that velocity, it's
that's
like,
awesome.
You want to bet on that person. And
for sure.
And so I was kind of like, had asked him if we could invest. He said, we're not really raising right now. And then eventually he asked me to do a diligence call with an investor that they were raising from. And so then I was like, hey, now I know you're raising.
I can't escape it anymore.
Yeah. And so like that experience of being the third customer of this thing that was like still being built in front of me. And now they have billions of dollars in deposits and are just and have been valued at $1.6 billion. And so it's like, it is to see something go from like basically nothing to really, really being a thing and having a big impact is just so powerful. So yeah.
That's amazing. How do you evaluate your investments? What criteria do you use?
So we don't, in terms of like, well, mainly what we're looking for is like, if everything goes right, is there a 100x opportunity from here? So we're not super price sensitive. We'll invest in something in like a seed at $100 million valuation if we think that if everything goes right, there's a 100x opportunity. And so that's like the main kind of thing where we look across a lot of different sectors. And then like, but then in terms of how we actually like evaluate do we want to bet on this company? Comes down mostly to the founders and mostly to like velocity. We try to, however possible, find two dots on a line so we can see where were they 3 months ago, where are they today, in terms of not necessarily just like revenue or growth or something, but like anything, like what assumption, how quickly are they like throwing their assumptions out because they learned that they were wrong, and how quickly are they like just putting stuff out there and those types of things. Because in my experience, that's just like by far the most important thing, because the velocity, it's like you're very rarely going to be on the right path, and the fastest way, the people with velocity are going to be the ones that get to the point of realizing they're not on the right path way sooner. And so I think the startups that I've seen that just have like a kind of idea and a vision and just go heads down toward that vision for a long time, that's where sometimes you're right and it can work really well, but those ones are tougher for me to bet on versus one that might look like it's kind of all over the place, but that the only thing that's always true for them is that they're moving very fast, because then I believe that they're going to figure something out. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, is like finding the insight that's going to be the thing that pushes you. And yeah, so I would say that's kind of how we do it. Don't have a super formal process. And like, I mean, it's like over Twitter DMs sometimes, like we don't always do pitch calls with people. And so sometimes it's like we just see something awesome and message them and say, can we please write you a check? And so yeah, it's kind of all over the place, and we love to we get a lot of inbound. So we've also invested in companies that were completely cold inbound, or friends will like let us know about a deal that they're doing, and we'll jump into it. So it's a huge mix of kind of things, but we don't kind of try to take it ourselves too seriously and think that we actually can predict the future. And so instead it's like we just look for one signal of like, this person is someone you want to bet on.
Amazing. Any advice for people getting into angel investing?
I mean, it's basically that. Like so I have a Twitter thread on this that was like how to become an angel investor if you don't have much money, basically, because that's what we did, and we did kind of like plan to do it, and it took a long time. The check into Lattice was 2015, and the fund we raised was 2019. So it was 4 years later that we actually were able to like start writing slightly bigger checks and also pick up the velocity. And so I think that's the main thing, is like try to write the smallest checks you possibly can, because what matters when you go to raise, if what you want to do is raise money from other people and actually like have a fund, the things that are going to matter are what deals did you get into and at what point, not like what were the dollars that you returned. And so like, if you like, I don't know, I mean, if you end up hitting an Uber and you invested $1,000 when you could have invested 10, you'll be bummed definitely later on, but most of them aren't going to be Uber. And like, that's the thing, is you want to have just, if you can just show that you found one company that really broke out, then you will be able to find people that want to bet on you to bet on the next batch of companies. And so I think it's like taking it slow, and then just like, it's hard to predict the future. So you just have to figure out who are people that I want to bet on, that I think like are going to be able to like make something happen here. And then the smallest checks, so that you can kind of get a few swings at bat to either, if you want to do it kind of your own investing, then like, so that you just have the kind of portfolio approach, because most of them will fail. And so I think mostly it's like, just don't, I see a lot of like early angel investors who try to like replicate what they think a VC would do. And they do these hour-long Zoom calls where they're like asking about all these different things with the business. And it's like believing that you are going to uncover some insight in that process where you're trying to do like a diligence call the way a VC would, that does it professionally and has been doing it professionally for 10 years, like is naive. And so we need to look at what your special insight is, which might be that you are tapped into networks, or that you know something about an industry, or that you like are just have an uncanny ability to convince hot investors or hot founders to let you into their deals, or whatever it is. But you need to look for what that is, and it's probably not you kind of asking the questions you think VCs are supposed to ask, because very little comes from those types of questions.
Makes sense. Great advice. Thanks for sharing. What's coming next? If you had to make 3 predictions for the future of, the audio space, digital media, creator economy, what would they be?
I mean, audio space, I think that I like, so, I mean, like I said, we've been about a year of iterating on different audio products, and we launched Racket in the App Store about 6 weeks ago. And I like have just never had more conviction about something I'm building and the reason that we're building it. And so it's it's very early days, but I really think that we are going to actually figure it out and accomplish that goal of like cracking open the top of the funnel and getting tons and tons more people publishing their voice online. So I guess I'll just go with the generic prediction of that is going to happen. We're going to see an order of magnitude or multiple orders of magnitude more people publishing their voice online. I think there's a good chance it'll be on Racket, but it might not. But I think that the prediction holds either way. And then in terms of broader kind of media creator economy, I don't know. I mean, I think one thing that I've loved about Racket is that we have people who are kind of like creators who would call themselves a content creator and who maybe get paid to make content. But we have lots of other people who never would have used that word content creator and probably couldn't tell me what the creator economy is. And it's just like they're having fun meeting people and like posting stuff. And that to me reminds me of some of the most fun things that I did early days in the internet, like early Tumblr, early Twitter, and then even going farther back to like IRC way back in high school, where it's like it's not, everything isn't being monetized. It's just for fun, and kind of like what you're talking about with you, what drives you to do the podcast. And so I know that the creator economy inspires me because there's all these people who have made a full-time career out of making content. But I think what it led to is this kind of tunnel vision of like every piece of content that anyone posts anywhere needs to be monetized. And I think what you lose then is the people that are just like having fun. And I think that we will maybe see a swing back toward that, where it's like, you don't need to monetize every single bit of work. And that doesn't need to be the focus from day one, because a lot of amazing creativity comes from people that are just kind of following a drive to just like have fun and post what's interesting to them and connect with the people that it resonates with.
For sure. I mean, we've seen some of the problems that have grown out of the Web 2 era already, right? Creator burnout, feeling like you're constantly on the hype cycle. Your friends in podcasting or social media creators who are saying, I can't take a vacation because there's no safety net. And once I go away, the algorithms drop my content. And so there's this pressure to constantly perform and constantly monetize every single thing that you do. But I think where we're moving with the Web3 movement is ownership and this decentralization structure, which can hopefully reintroduce that aspect of, yes, it is amazing that some people are able to now make a living doing what they love, but hopefully more of us can use this platform, these internet technologies to do what we love online, and not everything needs to make money, for sure.
Yep, exactly.
So Austin, one of my favorite questions to ask everyone who comes on the show, and you'll have a slightly different take on this since you're just in the midst of working on a new business, but I'm always curious, like, where's the white space? If you weren't building Racket, what would you do aside from that, right? What are the opportunities out in creator economy, media, entertainment right
now? Let me think for 1 second.
Sure, take your time.
I mean, I think maybe one thing that I would say is that I feel like what's been really cool about so much media moving online is that the kind of like themes and formats and like structures of content have been challenged in a lot of ways. But I also actually think that like we've only seen like the very, very tip of the iceberg with that stuff. So like TV shows on Netflix or HBO or wherever, it's like they're all still, they've challenged it in some ways in like maybe releasing a full season at once or like, I don't know, different things that people are doing, but it also feels like it's not pushing the boundaries enough. And then again, with like podcasting, it's like, I feel like there's so much opportunity for people to do really creative things with podcasting or with audio more generally, that just break the mold entirely of what we think of as a podcast or a radio show. And then same with video. Video maybe is where, like with at least short form video, where we've seen a lot of like creative kind of like breaking the mold. But I think all of it to me feels like it's like just scratching the surface, and that we're gonna see things that really, really kind of flip that on its head, where like our kids will grow up and when they think of like a sitcom or a show that you would sit down and watch, their vision of it might not involve a 30-minute kind of thing, or it might just look totally different than what we have in our heads. So I don't know exactly how to fully articulate what I'm saying, other than that I just think that there's like that all the most awesome stuff is just in breaking the mold of the ideas that we have in our head of like what media or entertainment should look like. And I think we're going to see some crazy stuff that challenges those things.
100%, right? No one would have predicted we'd have unboxing videos or haul videos, right? None of this stuff would have gotten greenlit in an era of centralized decision makers with, all these gatekeepers. And then YouTube comes along and like blows all that out of the water.
Yep.
And we're constantly inverting the models of, what are journalists talking about, or who can create a podcast now. So the internet will continue to, over time, challenge those norms of what is video content, what is audio content, what does a TV show have to be? And that's really exciting. Yeah, last question, where can people find out more about you and more about Racket?
So let's see. So racket.com, or just search for Racket in the App Store. It's RACKET, like a tennis racket. And then we also just this week are launching a thing called Podcash, which you can find at podcash.com. That's podcash.com, where we're working with a company called Stir, and we're giving away $100,000 in sponsorship to up and coming podcasters. The only real requirement is that you have to have made less than $10,000 in revenue for your podcast since starting it. And you don't even have to have a podcast to apply. So you can just share your idea. And so the dollar amounts will range from $250 to $5,000. And it's like a 6-week application period. And then we have an amazing panel of judges and who are going to be reviewing all the applications and selecting winners so that we can give money, because all of the sponsorship money in podcasting goes to the like top couple hundred podcasts. And there's so much amazing stuff that, again, as I was saying before, that like doesn't fall into that. And so we're trying to support the folks that are like just at the point of starting their podcast or might be into it for a while, but that haven't been able to land sponsorship. And so that's Podcash. And then I'm active on Twitter. I've mentioned it a few times today. So AWWSTN is my Twitter handle. And you can definitely find me there. And then my DMs are open there. So that's the best way to reach out if you have anything you want to say.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to download Racket, check it out. I'm excited to go play around a little bit more. Certainly check out Podcash, now once it's live, and then of course to connect with you on other social channels. So Austin, thanks again. This has been a blast to hear a little bit more about your story and the exciting stuff you guys are building at Racket. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you, James. It was super fun.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm James Creech, and this has been another edition of All Things Video. If you like what you hear, we hope you'll share and subscribe for new episodes. See you next time.